Hi, everybody. My name is Francesca Rossi. I work at IBM Research and I am the company global leader for responsible AI and AI governance. I'm also the past president of AAAI, and I would really like to welcome you all to this AAAI panel discussion on scientific integrity in the age of AI. As we all know, AI capabilities and research are really undergoing a fast and significant transformation along many dimensions, including the topics of research, the methods of research, the research community itself, and also the working environment. And in this very rapidly evolving scenario, it's important to be able to clearly identify the trajectory of AI and AI research and the challenges still ahead of us to make AI more capable, but also more reliable and safer. To contribute to this goal, in March 2025, AAAI published a report on the future of AI research, which summarizes the findings of a study of several months on significant AI research trends. The report describing the findings of the studies, which can be found on the AAAI website, identify a total of 17 topics, including AI reasoning, agentic AI, embodied AI, AI ethics, AGI, AI for science, and many more. For each of them, a chapter sketches its history, current trends, open challenges. AAAI has already held panel discussion on 6 of the 17 topics: AGI, AI perception versus reality, AI reasoning, AI and sustainability, AI factuality and trustworthiness, and the AI agents. And you may also find a replay of this discussion in the same site as the report. Today, we will focus on it and discuss a topic that was not included in the report, not because we didn't think it was important, but because we didn't have time. But I think is very, very central to the future of AI research. And the topic is scientific integrity. Of course, scientific integrity is the foundation of the research environment. It relies on principles such as honesty, rigor, transparency, accountability, and trust, and it is upheld through processes that evaluate the quality, originality, and reliability of scientific work. Today, the rapid adoption of AI is transforming every stage of the research and publication life cycle, creating both new opportunities but also new challenges for scientific integrity. Authors can use AI to improve writing, analyze data, generate code, explore hypotheses, potentially really accelerating scientific discovery. Reviewers can use AI to summarize submissions, identify relevant literature, support in many ways the review process. Publishers and conference organizers can leverage AI to detect plagiarism, fabricated content, image manipulation, conflict of interest, review anomalies, helping to improve really the effectiveness and efficiency and the quality control. At the same time, AI raises important concerns: the generation of inaccurate or fabricated content and references, the amplification of biases, question about authorships and accountability, risk to confidentiality in peer review, and the potential erosion of independent critical judgment. And as AI becomes increasingly embedded in research and peer review, the central challenge is not whether AI should be used or should be banned, but how it can be used responsibly to strengthen rather than undermine the integrity, fairness, and trustworthiness of the scientific process. So we will discuss all of these and much more with the following panelists. Joydeep Biswas, Associate Professor, University of Texas at Austin. Hi, Joydeep. Thomas Dietrich, University Distinguished Professor Emeritus, Oregon State Universities. Hi, Thomas. Fei Fang, Associate Professor of CMU. Hi, Fei. And Michael Kirkpatrick, Professor at James Madison University. Hi, Michael. Let me start, before we go into the discussion, with a reminder to everybody in the Zoom link to write your questions in the chat. We will try to address some of your questions if there is time and if the questions are addressing something that we are not covering in our discussion. So let's start by trying to define what the ethics issues are in the use of AI in this process of scientific production. So let me start with Faye. So in general, Faye, when we talk about scientific integrity in AI conferences, what are the main categories of concern that we should be preparing for?
Yeah, so we have seen a lot of concerns related to kind of reviewing process, for example, author reviewer collusion, and reviewers kind of make up fake profiles of big names and trying to pretend themselves to be a big name reviewer so that they can assign with more papers so that they can determine the fate of more papers. And also, that's kind of one category. And also, we see authors sometimes using LLMs to generate content in the paper without carefully checking them, leading to hallucinated references and completely wrong claims. And we these are some of the kind of the major categories of issues, and of course there are some like less often seen cases. For example, like someone is submitting someone else's paper to a conference, claiming themselves as an author for whatever reason. And yeah, these are the things that people care about and are worried about.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to chime in? Tom. Tom, you are on mute.
Sorry, we still can't hear you, Tom.
No, we cannot hear you. Yeah. While Tom is fixing the problem, maybe Joydeep, you want to chime in?
Yeah, so I think one way to think of it is like what's the life cycle of science, right? So there's ethical issues you can think about in the creation of the science, conducting the research. There's the phase where you're sending this out for peer review, and that's the part where Faye was talking about of reviewer collusions to try to unduly bias like the review process, and then the conduct of the review itself. And then finally, the dissemination. And as you can imagine, there are threats to validity in all of the stages of them. And we really have to think a bit about how all of the many threats and mitigations that we can have throughout the life cycle of the scientific process.
Thanks.
Let's see if can you hear me
Yes,
now?
yes,
Okay,
Yes.
we hear
success.
you.
Yeah. So I'm on this panel. I guess a part of my role is that I'm the chair of the computer science section at Archive. And so, of course, Archive does not conduct a deep review the way the AAAI conference or a journal would. And so it's easier to fool the archive moderation process with fake paper material. So we get papers written by with AI tools that are based on absolutely no research at all, right? Including synthetic data in tables, synthetic charts, and of course citing synthetic non-existent references. Although there are two motivations authors have. One is just to get additional papers on their resume, and the other is to inflate the citation counts of people that they're citing. And so we're seeing a genre of paper that is, for instance, as absolutely boring as possible, that would not get accepted at a regular conference because it's too boring or unoriginal, but it's good enough to get through the archive moderation process, get indexed by Google Scholar, and increase counts. So that's maybe a form of misconduct that's unique to the archive setting.
Okay. Yeah. Michael,
I know authors also worry about inadvertently plagiarizing someone else's work
yeah.
if the LLM has memorized it and then regurgitates it as part of their article. And this really raises a technical problem that the machine learning community has not solved, which is how can we have successful attribution by these AI systems.
Thanks. Michael.
And I would add a couple things. So my role here is that I am the chair of the Ethics and Plagiarism Committee for ACM. And I am also the chair of a task force that Joydeep is also on called CLEAR. You can find us at clearcomputing.org. And our task force has representatives from ACM, IEEE Computer Society, CRA, AAAI, SciAm, Usenix, and Informatics Europe. And this is a big part of what we're doing is we're looking at what are all of these concerns that are out there. And a big theme that I would sort of note is that many of the issues that are being discussed are not actually necessarily new. Fake reviewer profiles, reviewer and author collusion, data fabrication, plagiarism. it's not necessarily true that these are being created by AI. It's just that AI is in many ways an accelerant for many of these problems that have already existed for a very long time. And we're in the task force, we're looking at how this is affecting not just AI conferences, but conferences across the computing industry. And we are seeing a lot of these same themes over and over again.
Yeah, so that's why my next question was, exactly about something that you mentioned. So, Joydeep, so of these current threats to scientific integrity, which are really new instances and which are being maybe not new, but are being accelerated through the use or actually the misuse of the technology? And it seems to me that also one thing that may be different in having these threats generated by the use of AI rather than what was happening earlier on is the presence of sometimes the absence of the intent. So people ask AI to generate references. They didn't intend to generate fabricated references, but they don't check. So does intent matter in the case of integrity or not? Can
Okay,
you
so
say
these are
something about
great questions. And I think Michael started touching on some of them. So I want to give like the spectrum of all of these issues, right? So there's like classical issues that have existed for a while, and they are getting more pernicious with misuse of tools. An example of that is image manipulation. We've already heard of like the problems of photoshopping figures for a while, but now you can actually have AI tools generate images on command, right? But on the other extreme, there are concepts that existed. For example, these thing called dual submissions, which we've been aware of for a while, but they've taken on a completely new form with the misuse of modern tools. And I believe we'll touch on this particular thing about like dual submissions morphing into something else later. But we find like things entirely in the spectrum. And as you were, Francesca, as you were saying, like the intent is not necessarily clear. It is an unfortunate consequence that we have these amazing tools available today. We're still trying to understand what they are and are not capable are, how they should be used, and what their capabilities and limitations are. So in some cases, it might be the intent might not have been there. But I think from the ethical standpoint, I think the problem here is that harm is real, whether it was intended or not. So in some sense, it is important that we monitor and actually catch these instances. I would probably volunteer to say intent probably matters in terms of how you prosecute them, uh, but it doesn't necessarily have a bearing on us, the importance of catching them, right?
Okay.
So just some thoughts to get the conversation started.
Yeah, anybody else wants to chime in on this topic?
Right. I mean, I think a new form of plagiarism we are seeing is taking a paper, having AI rewrite it, and submitting it. And that it eludes our traditional plagiarism detection tools, which operate at the word level or the phrase level. Of course, it's also possible to take a paper and do that multiple times. So authors themselves will take a paper, create four different versions of it, and submit them all simultaneously. And so that's a weird kind of dual submission to the same conference. And yeah, so these are newly implemented things. Maybe computer science is particularly subject to these because we many of our experiments are purely computational. And so there are no additional laboratory materials about, how we had to keep the mice alive or what we had to run with the DNA sequencing machine. And I wonder if we will have a time when we want to have digital signatures on all of these instruments, not just on Photoshop, but many other things to be able to prove that the experiments were actually run and these results really came out of this program.
Yeah. So you mentioned, Tom, two features of AI that are really significant here in creating new issues, like the scale. So before
Sure.
using AI, you couldn't write, manually 4 times rewriting your paper, or even more, no? And the easiness of generating these new experiments or new experimental results or new sections of a paper or whatever. So scale and easiness is really making things different, also in terms of plagiarism. Anybody else wants to add on that?
I would add one more point on Joydeep's point about intent. That one thing that's really important in a lot of this process, and we'll kind of come back to this later as well when we're talking about detecting and working with violations that occur. Intent really matters, but there are two different things that come into play. One is preserving the integrity of the scientific record, and there was a reference to there was harm done. So things can be retracted, rejected, period. And that's not necessarily going to be a penalty or a sanction. That's just about preserving the record. Whereas with the issue of intent, that comes into play of does there need to be additional sanctions related?
Okay, we'll talk later about the policies.
Yeah.
Faye, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Tom said because we see this kind of dual submissions where the wording is not exactly the same, but the result are kind of the same in
Yeah,
commons.
yeah. Okay,
And dual
so
submission, yeah, again, dual submission is a old problem. It existed for a long time, and with the now the problem becomes exacerbated in some sense.
yeah. So another thing is that here we are all AI, but not Michael, is ACM more generally, is representing ACM. But it seems that these issues, since they are also some of them generated or amplified by AI, they occur specifically and or more at AI conferences or publishing venues, or do they also occur, if, as of your knowledge, in other domains, or also do they only occur in very large venues like large AI conferences or also small ones? So what are the features of a scientific venue, whether it's a conference, a journal, whatever, that seems to attract this unethical behavior in also supported by AI? Who wants to start responding to that? Tom.
Well, I guess in our conversations at Archive with other journals and other archives, uh, we see this kind of behavior happening everywhere. Perhaps it started first in computer science because we're early adopters and we developed the technology. But the biology journals are facing it, the physics sections in Archive are facing it, and we see the commercial publishers are expanding their research integrity teams in-house. So it's costing money throughout all these organizations.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, I
Anybody
think
else? Yeah.
it's fair to say, based on the articles and reports from venues like Nature and Science and medical journals, that this is a prevalent issue. It's not only about computer science and AI. And I think the factors, the common factors, seem to be increasing burden on reviewing, the inability to keep up with the pace, and the increase in the case of the ethical violations because of the misuse of these AI. We're really seeing this asymmetric dynamic where it's much easier to commit than it is to find and check for them. I think to answer your question, Francesca, of like where is this coming from, I think we have to think a little bit about the structural and societal factors that are at play to incentivize bad behavior, rewarding citation counts rather than impact, or other opaque metric-driven hiring, promotions, and tenure processes. I think we really need to take a deep look at all of these unfortunate incentivizing mechanisms at play.
Yeah, and also, again, Tom mentioned at the beginning, the main motivation is for people to get more citations or to get more publications, but also to get more publication in top venues, venues that are listed by some organization as a top venue, and so that attracts more of this unethical behavior, I think, in this top venue like AAAI or New Rips or others that are considered, or Nature, that others that are considered a good, a top application venue, I think. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what I observe is that smaller research communities have less of a kind of a gaming
Yeah,
issue.
yeah,
For larger conferences, it's like no one knows everyone else, so it's easier for them psychologically to game the system because they feel
yeah,
like they are gaming the
yeah.
system. They are not gaming the
Other
community
people.
that they're part of.
Yeah.
And in my role with ethics and plagiarism, I can say that we are seeing a lot of these problems everywhere, that it's not tied to any specific communities. This is not just an AI specific thing. And I'll also add one thing that hasn't really been brought up so far is that this also is not just an issue on the authorship side. There are also concerns about ethical use on the reviewing side, because there are concerns that if you have a double anonymous submission venue, for instance, that the use of tools on the reviewing side can de-anonymize the paper or could potentially leak confidential issues. And so we are seeing some of these things happening in a wide variety of different places, large venues, small venues, and a large part of what helps to make communities resilient towards this is that if there is some sort of deterrent factor, if there is a message from leadership that these things are important, if there is a heavy emphasis, that really goes a long way with some of this stuff. For a lot of the issues that we're seeing, part of it is that a lot of people just aren't sure right now what's allowed, what's not, that they're not getting clear guidance.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we'll discuss about the policies and
Yeah.
disclosures about the policies and so on. So another issue is that staying in the authorship side, there are many things that can be generated and for supporting the writing of a paper. For example, we know that LLM can generate fabricated references. That's the typical mistake that LLMs make. But they can also fabricate experimental results or things to put in other parts. So to what extent should all these mistakes made because of AI limitations or behavior should be treated the same or differently, or in a paper should be considered as ethically as serious or in a different ways? Tom, do you want to start?
Well, at Archive, we have focused on detecting the bad citations because right now that is the easiest way to detect that the
Yeah,
authors did not check the output of LLMs.
yeah,
But in terms of penalties, uh, I agree that fabrication of scientific results is much more serious,
yeah,
particularly in any area that bears on public policy, healthcare, things like any kind of high stakes setting. Um, but there's also concern that and I think Michael mentioned it earlier, the scientific record gets polluted with these bad citations. This has always happened before. I mean, it's kind of fun to watch a process of evolution of a wrong citation as it gets replicated with error. I think that particular problem our technology should be able to fix it relatively soon. And I will be really shocked if a year from now we have this problem of hallucinated citations because that's one we should easily fix, much easier than checking the results of a
yeah,
complex experiment.
yeah. Anybody else?
So I'll sort of build on that a little bit. That I come from the perspective of, fabrication is fabrication, which calls into question the validity of the paper. But what you do about it might differ. So as far as the question of, because so many people right now are focusing on fabricated citations and references, I kind of go back to what is the purpose of a reference or citation, and it's about documenting where your work came from, what you're building on, why you started where you did. It's about building that foundation, and if that is fabricated, that does call into question some of the other judgments that you're
Yeah,
making along the way. And I
yeah,
would, sort of make an analogy of, what happens if somebody, instead of fabricating the references, they fabricate the motivation section and they say that we are solving this problem that affects 50 billion people, except for the fact that 50 billion people are not affected. That it's a problem that the record is wrong.
yeah,
So at that point, I think that the work should be retracted and or rejected. That the record should be corrected. But is the harm of that the same as completely fabricated results in a different part? Maybe not. And so maybe that there should be some different handling of that. But I think that a lot of this discussion right now about with everyone focusing on references is that it's kind of interesting because I think references have for a long time been treated as sort of an afterthought. And I think it's starting to help raise this issue with people to think that, okay, what are we actually doing with all of these parts of the paper?
Yeah, so you're saying that even if, as Tom said, maybe this issue technically will be fixed, so LLMs will be able to generate perfectly correct references, but the point is not that one. The point is that you should use your references not to just write the last page of your paper and to fill it, but to start from there to build your work. So if you just use an LLM to generate the last page full of references, that's not you're not actually basing your work on that list of references. Anybody else wants to say something about this topic?
Yeah, I just want to add that as we had mentioned earlier, ethics is a question that arises throughout the scientific process. Increasingly, we're seeing, for example, that once upon a time, writing code used to be tedious and time consuming. It is not the time consuming part anymore, thanks to all these coding agents. What is indeed very even more important now is asking the questions to ensure that we have done due diligence of checking the outputs, checking that the
Yeah.
results are actually valid. So, and I think this having this healthy scientific skeptic in us is becoming even more critical, even more important. We don't look at binary code anymore. We're increasingly getting to the point we look at code even less. So it becomes much more important for us to look at the results, ask hard questions about them, both as authors and as reviewers.
Yeah, so we are not looking at binary code because we know that compilers and interpreters are not are deterministic, and so they compile into the right ones and zeros. But the problem is that now we have a compilation layer which is non-deterministic, and so that's why that needs, I think, careful, supervision, orchestration from the human, which right now is a bit left on the side.
Right. Now,
Okay, so
sometimes when I've had a result I wasn't sure was correct, I'd have a second student implement a second version of the code.
yeah,
We can do that now cheaper too. We can actually ask
Yep.
two different LLMs to produce two different versions, and so that's another advance. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, definitely. Okay, so then let's go to another question that many people have, which is about the author's responsibility of what is the content of a paper. So if I use an AI system to design an experiment, execute an experiment, analyze the result, and then even write them up, is it ethical for me to publish these results as my own work? And if so, what kind and degree of monitoring and verification I should be expected to do before I can sign my name and saying I did this work and I take responsibility? So are there other conditions, for example, that I paid for the LLM that I used or the resources required to run the system that should hold before I can be defined as the author of that work? Tom, do you want to say something about that?
Well, I think the authors are the moral agents who are responsible for the work, and
Yeah,
so they need to assure that the results in the paper are correct, and that would include the references and everything. And we have seen that yeah, the use of AI shifts the point in the process where we need to do the assurance work. It used to be when we were writing the code, we thought very carefully about each line. And so some assurance was done up front before the results were produced. Now we get the results, we still need to do that assurance work. So I think teams need to think carefully about what's your release process for releasing a paper, and what kinds of quality assurance are you going to do, and realize that things that were sufficient in the past are no longer sufficient. But there's no question the authors are responsible.
yeah.
And they should suffer the penalties if they publish something that turns out to be false. So,
Right. Anybody else about this author responsibility topic?
I just want to give a fun example of like how we can use modern tools to our advantage in this. So one of the things that we do is like we want to release our code and have other people be able to replicate it, right? So something which we started doing in my lab, for example, is get the instructions in the code that we're releasing and give it to a less capable LLM and see if it can run it and reproduce it. If the less capable LLM can do it, then probably you're doing something right. Or it's just one example of like using tools to our benefit.
Very cool.
That's fun. Okay, so but there is also another aspect that in authorship, because usually many papers have multiple co-authors. And sometimes these multiple co-authors, even before using AI, they take care of different parts of the paper. And maybe these different co-authors also have different views or practices of on using AI for creating parts of the paper. So one co-author may use AI to generate part of the work included in the paper, maybe without telling the other co-authors. So to what extent should the individuals, each individual author, be held responsible for checking all co-authors' work, particularly when the use of AI then leads to things like fabrication of content or even plagiarism? Michael?
So generally, I mean, this kind of goes back to the previous question as well about what is authorship, and authorship is accepting responsibility for the work. And as far as the fact that what happens when there is a problem that arises, and again, there are two distinct elements to this. One is there a problem with the paper? Is there a problem with the work? And that's generally a binary question that at least for ACM policy is that we don't retract parts of papers, that a paper is either retracted or it's not. It's either rejected or it's not. We're not going to say, oh yeah, everything was great, but we're scrapping the related work section. That question of rejecting or retracting a work is really a binary thing, and there's not necessarily a way to parse out individual responsibility from there. Beyond that, the other part is, again, what happens if there is a sanction? So in ACM, we can impose bans from future submissions for 1, 2, or 5 years for various publications related violations. And those oftentimes turn into being judgment calls that we have to look at what everyone's role is. And certainly in some cases, it would not be appropriate to assign a ban to someone if they legitimately had no way to know what was going on. That if there was someone who actually created all the fake accounts to publish a paper in someone's name, we can't hold those people responsible. But if it's something where there's a supervisor who should have known, who should be supervising a junior colleague's work, then in those cases, it can be appropriate to hold them to the same level of accountability, even if they did not they were not responsible. So it's really a context-sensitive, context-specific response that has to occur.
Yeah. Anybody else wants to chime in on the multi-authorship? Tom?
Well, I think I continue to draw the analogy to when you're releasing a software system as a product. We don't require every engineer who worked on it to check every part of it, but we do want at least 2 pairs of eyeballs on each section, for example. So we have to have some systematic quality assurance process and in a large team. Somebody has to be the supervisor and make all that happen. So again, it just calls attention to what our release process is, and absolutely we can't expect all N pairs to check everything. Why would you have co-authors with different expertise? Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else?
But it's true when we impose sanctions, that sometimes leads to conflict among the co-authors, and resolving that is really difficult, I think, and does require leadership from on both sides. Yeah.
And one of the challenges that can come into play there is that you have to be aware of power differentials, because you don't want a supervisor to just throw a a junior colleague under the bus or something. That
Yeah.
we
Right,
have to be very
right.
careful about that.
Yes. So we'll talk about specific policies later, but more generally about
Sorry.
policies. No, we know now the issues, the authors and reviewers and so on. But then let's talk more generally. Whatever the policy is, uh, sometimes the policy is just a desk reject, no? Of a paper where we find some ethics issue. But so should conferences or other publication value consider multi-year sanctions? You already mentioned, Michael, the 1 to 5 years and so on, or some block lists for serious or repeated scientific integrity violation, or do we think that the desk reject for the current publication venue or conference is enough? And if so, what would be the distinguishing factor, the kind of violation that should trigger such more serious measures? Faye.
Yeah, so I think the nature of the misbehavior matters a lot. If it is, say, reviewer didn't complete their review on time, or authors had a dual submission for only once, that's kind of a less of an issue. But if we see, say, someone always submitting other people's paper to a conference multiple times across multiple conferences, that is going to be a much bigger concern and probably worse, longer sanction. And for the AI related ones, like even if the reviewers detect some hallucinated references, for example, if they only found one hallucinated reference, they'll probably just let it go or just ask the reviewer author to rebuttal about it. But if they see a lot of them, then that's going to be potentially like triggering a bigger red flag that could potentially lead to death rejection. So the extent to which the misbehavior causes problems definitely matters, and the frequency matters, and the maybe the how malicious the intention is could also matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Right. I think when there's clearly malicious intent, then desk reject is not sufficient. We need to keep these people out of the system, and so that's where Archive might impose a 1 year ban or something like this. If
Mm-hmm.
the problem is a lack of experience with new authors making mistakes, then something. Actually, something that maybe we need more of in the field is mentoring for young
Yeah.
researchers so that they understand what research actually is. And one thing we're finding is these AI tools are allowing independent researchers who do not have research training to
Yeah.
believe that they are doing research. And the tools will even offer to write the papers and even offer to submit them to archive. And I think as a community we could either just ban all these people entirely, but it seems like it would be in the spirit of open science to find some way that we can help them discover what research really is and how they can become members of the research community.
Yeah, and even how AI can responsibly be used to help them doing
Yeah,
research, no? So
right.
education is going to be very important. Um, um, Anybody else about
But
this?
I guess the question that often comes up with conferences and with and journals is at what point do we contact the institution that the author belongs to? At
Yeah,
what point do we basically require them to engage in an investigation that might lead to
yeah,
even more serious sanctions? At what point do we take the risk that they will sue us?
yeah,
And do we
yeah,
have the
yeah,
financial resources to fight such lawsuits?
yeah,
So I think this is another area where the community maybe needs to team up
yeah,
and jointly retain lawyers and think more carefully about how to go about those things.
yeah.
I think it's
Michael?
worth noting that investigating the intent, the magnitude, the prevalence of it are the reasons why sometimes investigating these issues takes so long and sometimes multiple years.
Mm, yeah,
The other thing I would add is that because there was a reference in here also to repeated offenses, and repeated offenses do require a higher level beyond just a desk rejection, because if the only thing that happens is a desk rejection, essentially you end up with people just trying to roll the dice each time. Maybe it'll
yeah,
get through this time.
Yeah, yeah, it's not really a deterrent. It's just you try, and if yeah. Okay, so let's go more specifically into the various policies. So, Tom, in your role at Archive, so then what is the framework for the penalties for inappropriate use of AI in papers that are submitted, or published on Archive? Because people may have seen that Archive recently decided on a policy to give this possibly even a 1-year ban, as you mentioned, for authors of papers that have AI fabricated references of other AI errors. So can you help us understand the rationale and give a bit, very briefly, the full picture of the AI-related policies at Archive?
So let's see. So Archive does not ban the use of AI at all. Our policy says
Yeah.
that regardless of how the paper was produced or the science was done, the authors are responsible. And so it's when we detect either misbehavior, fraud, error, incorrect citations, incorrect meta comments from the LLM that the authors didn't even find when they were before they submitted the paper. These are obviously cases where the authors must be held responsible for the errors in the paper, and so that's where we would impose a 1-year ban. But as Faye indicated, one bad reference is not going to, we're not going to impose a penalty for that. But it's again systematic behavior
Mhm.
in
So
the references.
you
We
said that,
have a mhm.
yeah, go ahead. Sorry. No, you said that, sorry to interrupt you. You said that Archive does not ban the use of AI, but
Correct.
the follow-up question is, does it require a disclosure of the use of AI?
Our policy is to require a disclosure. We don't have a way of effectively enforcing that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
But even
but
if,
we think that the net benefit has been huge of AI, particularly for people whose first language is not English.
yeah,
The
definitely.
quality of papers and their fluency has hugely improved, and
Yeah, yeah.
requiring people to disclose that they used AI to improve their language.
That's,
I'm not sure
yeah.
that the disclosure really has much function here.
Right. And also, as you say, independently of what generated the mistake, whether it was AI or through AI or human being, that's a mistake that you have to be
Right.
accountable for. Right. Okay. Okay, so Michael, why don't you tell us what the picture is about this policy at ICM? Because ICM, for example, recently changed the AI policy for authors to remove the requirement, and that's my question was about that, to remove the requirement to disclose the use of AI in writing a paper, which was a requirement until very recently. So can you give us the motivation and rationale and tell us a little bit what ICM is doing about these issues?
And there's a little bit more going on there that but it kind of builds in with some of the things that Tom was just saying, that originally our the policy was that you had to disclose all use of it for anything that you were generating beyond just minimal grammar checking.
Yeah.
And what we, not just at ACM, but many publishers have been seeing that adopted these kinds of policies, is that these disclosures just were not happening in many cases, and we don't really have any way of checking or enforcing it. And so we really took a step back and said, okay, what are we actually trying to do with this policy? And so it's, even though we removed the sort of universal policy of saying that you have to disclose all AI use, the shift has been more to looking at the AI use as a part of the research methodology. And so the policy, no, it doesn't say that you have to disclose anything in particular or anything like that. There's not a mandatory disclosure requirement, but the policy is written in a way so that if you are using AI in any meaningful way as part of the research process, say for generating experiments, creating your experimental design, creating test cases, that's part of the methodology that needs to be documented. And so it's part of the the research record that we're really trying to emphasize there, is that the goal shouldn't be on mandating specific types of disclosure, but really on making sure that the overall integrity of the process is documented and clear, and will be done in a way that that supports reproducibility.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Joydeep, can you tell us the picture, the concrete policies that you and your team are put in place at AAAI?
Yeah, so for 2026, for example, the program chairs, Chad and Matt, work closely with the associate program chairs, which I was part of, and the ethics chairs to ensure that we did our very best to identify, clearly state what we are expecting the policies to be, and address the unethical issues of AI. So everything starts from the call for papers. So without going into details, I think for everyone aware, we put a lot of thought into exactly what we said and how we said and what we would allow and what we wouldn't allow for the use of AI. And to boil it down to like the core, I think I'll come back to what Michael said, which is that as an author, you have to stand by the paper. We don't disallow the use of AI, but you have to stand by your paper. AI does not count as authorship. You cannot blame AI for it. You have to blame yourself if some a mistake is caught. That's an example of a policy which was clearly stated in the call for papers. Other policies include responsible conduct as reviewers, and there's entire procedures that we had documented that you have to follow as reviewers. One specific example of that was that we disallowed the use of any LLM, self-hosted or otherwise, for reviewing. Partly also because, for AAA 2026, we had this AI review pilot where we were taking a custom, state-of-the-art, absolute no holds barred AI review system, and it was intended to see as an experiment what could the system catch which would be hard for humans to catch. So we really wanted to make sure that for the human reviewers we were getting a diverse perspective, like the human experience and like the scientific experience over there. So these are the public facing policies, but it's also something that often goes, it doesn't actually become as public is internal policies that happen. We had policies in place and thinking about how we would catch them, what we would do when we form them. There are internal bylaws in AAA, which says, for example, when you catch a violation, before you can do anything with it, it needs to be investigated by at least two members of the organization committee, which we did to every single case. And unfortunately, because of the sheer volume, AAA 2026 was a record volume in the number of submissions. We had to grow the ethics board, and these are some of the things that we had to do. So we developed new tools as well, and we'll talk about these when we get to the tools part. But this is just a broad overview of like the different ways and the policies in which we had in place.
Okay, thank you. Faye, what do you want to add, and what do you see in other AI publication venues like New Reaps or other AI venues in terms of
Uh,
policies?
yeah, so I don't have a lot to add. People have already had a lot of things said there.
Okay. So Jody, why don't you go to the tools briefly, about the tools that we have available to enforce these policies that various organizations have put in place?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, as part of the clear task force that Michael was talking about that we're part of, we're actually trying to understand all of the tools that all of these organizations are using. Many of these tools are actually classical things like plagiarism detection tools, and more commonly, more recently, like citation checking tools and all. But I want to spend a little bit of time just talking about some customs tools that we developed. So the use of AI is leading to misuse, but it's also increasing the ability for organizers to actually catch them. An example of this is that as we were talking about these newer form of dual submissions, which I believe Chad coined the term fraternal twins. It's very hard for humans to detect. Like if you have the two papers side to side, you can't like see a clear correlation. So we actually built an internal tool using a zero data retention and a custom interface where we would give anonymized papers to this a system and have it actually understand the severity of the overlap between them with rationale. And this would actually allow us to look at the results of them, which would which would generate outputs such as high severity. Look at the row in table one from paper A with the column in table two in paper B. And then the human could look at them and say, oh, wow, this is really exactly the same thing. Or that, this equation is exactly the same as equations over there. If you have to replace F with A and B with C, it's exactly the same. So all I want to say is that we have spent a lot of time developing these custom tools. It's only the beginning, and all I want to tell the community is rest assured we're doing a very, very best to bring the latest and frontier models out there to help with maintain integrity.
Yeah, and a follow-up question was, these are the tools that we have. Which are the tools that we wish we had and we still don't have it?
Well, I will start with like the most obvious, very difficult thing to have, which is intent. Can you infer intent? And it's near impossible to infer intent. I think Michael was talking about repeated cases, right? It would be
Yeah.
interesting and nice to have tools which could actually catch repeated occurrences over time. We don't have such things. And I will also talk about one thing which seems really trivial, but it's very, very hard, verifying identity. So we want to make sure that at identity, someone submitting a paper is indeed the person submitting. Someone claiming to be Francesca Rossi submitting a paper needs to be the Francesca Rossi, right? But unfortunately, it's really difficult. We've thought about this so many different ways. We've thought about ORCID IDs and this ID and that ID. There are workarounds to all of these. There is no foolproof system, unfortunately. Okay, I will just stop here.
Okay, thank you. So, Faye, what do you think about how much should the conference disclose about all these policies and detection methods and tools and the outcomes on the enforcement? Should this be clearly disclosed, or what are the considerations there?
Uh, my personal view is for the things that applies to everybody, having more transparency will be good. One is to kind of for the mitigate. One is definitely just for transparency itself within the scientific community. The other is it could also serve as a way to for mitigation. And however, for individual cases, how we're going to look into it, we may not need to review all of the details of manual investigation on any specific case. So, and also, I don't think that, oh, let's say this year we tried a new tool, then before using the new tool, we should first write a social media post to gather feedback. I think that's just overdue. Probably just go ahead and try it out, and then just if at some point we can reflect on what has happened after using the tool, and we feel like there are some lessons that we've learned from this. We can write a blog post about this and make it available to the public.
Okay. Is there a risk of gaming the system if you are too transparent about all the policies and tools that you're going to put in place? Who wants to comment on that?
I would
I don't know. Security through obscurity never has been successful. Yeah, I think it's better to be open. In fact, we should maybe reflect on how much double-blind reviewing has enabled fraud. Yeah.
And I would say that it's a difficult problem in both ways because I agree that transparency is important. At the same time, everything turns into an arms race. And so if the authors know that you're using this one particular tool,
Right.
well, then can I game it enough to
Yeah.
not be detected by that, even though
Yeah.
this other tool would be? So it's always an arms race.
Right. Okay, so now let's go to the other side a little bit, to the appeal side, because as you said, that many of these decisions about how to enforce a policy are judgment calls. They are not, you don't have 100%, sometimes you don't have 100% certainty that there was a violation of a policy. So, Michael, what are the acceptable uses of AI in investigating these publication integrity violations? And what are the procedures and safeguards that you need to put in place for authors to be able to defend themselves from allegations that are possibly false positives? So, so what can you say about that?
So I would say that when you're dealing with policy violations, anytime where there's going to be an investigation of some sort of violation, this has to be a human-driven process with safeguards for due process. That there are certain things that are low risk things like checking for plagiarism and stuff like that, that those can be inputs to maybe a quick decision, but even that is not foolproof because there can be cases where, say, Authenticate flags paper X as plagiarizing paper Y, and the investigation digs into it and finds out actually the authors of paper Y stole paper X, an earlier version of paper X that was just not published or rejected. And so tools are wonderful, important elements of all of this, but they can't be the final determinant, especially if you are going beyond just rejection. That if you're considering any sort of sanction beyond that, that there has to be a human process involved in this that gives anyone who's accused the opportunity to defend themselves.
Yeah, but even if the human is the or human team is the final decision maker to make this judgment, so what should be a fair appeal process for when a paper, an author, or a reviewer is flagged for a possible issue about scientific integrity? Anybody wants to comment on that?
Well, the person handling the appeal should not be the person that was involved in originally finding the problem, or that did the original investigation. So I think you want an independent process. Yeah,
Right.
that's the main piece of advice, I guess. Yeah.
So so in terms of these organisms that decide the policies and then decide the tools to enforce them and so on, right now it seems that it's a bit of a scattered thing. Each organism decides its own policies, archive, ACM, AAAI, and uses its own tools. And the clear, task force tries to say, okay, let's put together what we know and what tools we have, and maybe it's a community side. So, do you all agree that it's much the ideal scenario is a community size effort and not just and whatever we have to define what that community is, no? To address these issues and not just each publication value in isolation.
And that's
Sure. I mean, but we also want to make sure that all the organizations have space to innovate.
Yeah, right.
And bring the best practices back to everyone else. But absolutely, let's collaborate.
Yeah, we're really trying to focus on establishing common language, making sure we're looking at the same things, but giving the ability for local decisions and different values, different perspectives. So we do need to recognize that. But a large part of this is that we also have to recognize that we need to give more guidance to those who are actually running the conferences and stuff like that, and providing them resources. And so having some common language and guidance there is very beneficial. The other thing that we have to be aware of and we have to be thinking about is that none of our conferences or journals are isolated islands in themselves. And a lot of times what we are seeing is that there is behavior that spans these boundaries. So even though we do want to have as many local governance freedom as much as possible, there are times where we need to know that, hey, somebody is offering a favorable review in this particular venue in exchange for you giving me a favorable view in this different organization's venue. And so we do need that type of collaboration and cooperation to tackle some of these more difficult problems.
Yeah. So yeah, that's already looks at the future. No, the future is like helping the organization. And I think that what Tom mentioned earlier, the future also, I guess, involves educating authors and reviewers what would be the best way of using AI. All the opportunities that AI creates in a responsible way, rather than in these other that we think unethical ways. So, so a question, and maybe you can comment on that question, and maybe also give any final thought that you have about this topic. So, but if these papers, which are the unit with which we communicate our scientific work, are increasingly both written and reviewed by AI, then what role is left for human as authors or as reviewers, and how should the peer review process adapt or maybe change completely? Who wants to start? Michael.
And really, I would say even beyond that, if the papers are written, reviewed, and also only read by AI systems, then are we even engaging in science at that point? Because science is fundamentally a social process that people have to be involved. And we do need, peer review was kind of buckling under pressure already from having shortages of reviewers for so many papers. Now, if we've got the number of papers going up hundredfold, we do need to find ways to use AI and other tools to help with that while also still preserving the role of human judgment and the social element of the process.
Yeah, but I would say, okay, so what's the goal here? The goal is to advance science as fast as possible, or the goal is to make humans grow and learn and advance science as well, with even the friction that humans may, insert in the process, but the friction that we think it's a good thing rather than a bad thing, So anybody wants to comment on that? Yeah,
Well,
Georgia.
I would say that, I mean, deciding what are the advances that are necessary is intrinsically like a human thing. Like we have to be in charge of deciding this is the thing, a big problems of today. This is what we need to focus on. This is how we should focus them. These are ways in which we address them, which are not appropriate. These are what's appropriate. And these are very much human values, right? So we cannot abdicate, these responsibilities to automated systems. I think Francesca, you touched on it, but education is part of the process as well. So this is why, like, we can't just like, much as we we didn't stop doing math when we had calculators, or rather arithmetic when we had calculators. We won't stop pursuing science on our own, even if tools can automate some of this.
But I
Yes.
suspect that we're going to have a change in, or a greater need for people who are more scholars than inventors. So if we imagine that we have this giant AI machine that is churning out new research faster than we can assimilate it, we need people whose job is to reach into that huge knowledge base of new results and pull out and understand the things that are of most value to humanity. And I also worry about, Stuart Russell likes to say, well, gorillas are threatened by humans. We need a group of humans that works on studying the AI systems to understand the threats they pose to us. And yeah, but I think people whose job is to deeply understand and interpret the results and communicate them to the rest of the scientific community, that role maybe becomes even more important. Um, this has been true in any field where there was an explosion of new knowledge. That people that were the people writing the review articles and the textbooks, their role became much more important. So.
Faye?
Yeah, I think we will, as people are naturally using more and more AI for research, it's hard to say that, oh, we should stop using AI in research because we want to maintain the human's role in the process. I don't think that's the future. But we do see that, at least in the short term, humans' judgment and taste still matters a lot in terms of research and where research is going. So that's what I see in the near term. For the longer term, it's hard to say.
Okay, with that uncertain conclusion, let me thank all the panelists for, I think it was a very insightful discussion that I hope has shed some light or given some food for thought on this topic of scientific integrity. I thank you also to all of the people who joined us. The panel has been recorded and the recording will be available soon on the AAAI website, where you can find already the recording of the previous panels and also on the AAAI YouTube channel. So see you soon for another interesting discussion on AI. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.